But then, just as the vows were about to end, something unexpected happened. Sophie, my sweet, innocent little girl, looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, I have to go to the bathroom." I froze for a moment, panicking. We were in the middle of the ceremony, and there was no way I was going to make a scene. But Sophie was tugging at my sleeve, desperate to go. I looked at my son, who was thankfully sitting quietly, and made the decision to get up. "I'll be right back," I whispered to him before standing and quickly leading Sophie toward the back of the room. But as we walked toward the exit, the unthinkable happened. Sophie tripped on the edge of the carpet and fell, her small body crashing to the ground with a loud thud. The entire room seemed to freeze. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft hum of the wedding music, and then came the collective gasp of the guests. I rushed to Sophie's side, pulling her up in a panic. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. She sniffled, tears welling up in her eyes, but thankfully she wasn't hurt. "I'm okay, Mommy," she said, looking up at me with wide, embarrassed eyes. I could feel everyone's gaze on us. It was like time had stopped. All I wanted to do was get out of there, get Sophie out of the spotlight, but we were already in the middle of the aisle and I couldn't make a scene in front of everyone. I glanced up toward the front of the room where my sister was standing, eyes wide in disbelief. She looked angry. Her face tightened, and for the briefest moment I saw the exact expression I had feared, a mixture of frustration and embarrassment, like she was wishing I would just disappear. My heart sank. As I helped Sophie stand up and we began walking to the back, I heard a few whispered remarks from the crowd. "That's her sister, right?" one of them said. I heard her kids were going to cause problems. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, the sting of their words biting deeper than I wanted to admit. We made it to the bathroom where I quickly checked Sophie for any bruises or scrapes, but she was fine, just shaken. I held her tightly, taking a moment to breathe. "Do you want to go back?" I asked her softly. She nodded. "I don't want to miss the cake." I laughed a little, despite the tension in my chest. "Okay, let's go back then." But as we re-entered the hall, it was clear that things weren't going to go as smoothly as I'd hoped. The damage had already been done, and I had no idea just how much worse it was going to get. We returned to our seats, Sophie clinging to my side as I tried to steady my breath. The whispers, the stares, they hadn't stopped. It felt as though the entire room was judging us for something that wasn't even our fault. And as we sat down, I could see it in my sister's eyes. The irritation was unmistakable. She didn't look at me directly, but I saw the way she glanced at Sophie, then quickly looked away. I could feel the tension mounting, a wall between us growing ever higher with every passing second. The ceremony continued, but I couldn't focus. Not anymore. All I could think about was how we weren't even welcome here and how my presence had made things uncomfortable for her. I tried to shake the feeling off, focusing on the kids, but it was hard. The air in the room felt suffocating. It wasn't just the whispers or the disapproving glances, it was the fact that no one seemed to want us there. I was no longer part of the celebration. I was just an outsider who had forced her way in. The ceremony ended without incident, but even as we all moved toward the reception, I could sense the underlying tension. My sister's bridesmaids barely acknowledged me as I walked past them. The only person who smiled at me was Emma, the wedding planner, who gave me a sympathetic look. I could feel it in my bones, this was going to be a disaster. Once we entered the reception hall, my fears only grew stronger. The table assignments were awkward, there were empty seats, but none near my sister or her closest friends. I ended up sitting at a table with distant relatives who barely even knew my name. The kids were restless, and I could see Sophie looking around the room, unsure of where to put her attention. She tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, I don't like it here," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her, but I felt the same. I didn't like it either. I didn't feel welcome, and neither did they. But then came the first bombshell of the night. The speeches. My sister's best friend, Clara, stood up to give the first toast. As she raised her glass, she began to recount funny stories about the bride, mostly lighthearted, but then she paused and looked over at my direction. I tensed up, my heart thumping in my chest. "And let's not forget the time Marie's sister, Laura, had a little incident at the family reunion," Clara said with a laugh, the rest of the room joining in. It was such a funny moment, right? The kids were so wild and, well, it was a lot of chaos. I could feel my face flush. I looked down at my lap, hoping no one would notice my discomfort. But the comments kept coming. Clara seemed to think it was hilarious, as did a few of the other guests. I didn't look up again until I heard a soft voice next to me. "Are you okay?" It was Emma, the wedding planner, leaning over slightly. She must have noticed the awkward tension in the air. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't know what to say. "She didn't mean anything by it," Emma continued. "It was just a joke. But I understand if it's a little uncomfortable." "A joke?" A joke about me, about my kids, at her wedding? I wanted to say something to stand up for myself, but the words stuck in my throat. I'm fine, I finally muttered, forcing a smile. Thanks for checking on me. But I wasn't fine. I wasn't even close to fine. Every time I tried to enjoy the night, it felt like another jab. The dance floor was filled with couples, and every time I glanced at my sister, she looked more and more distant. She wasn't even looking in my direction. The night was dragging on, and I was just about to pull the kids away and leave when the second surprise hit. It was the cake cutting. My sister called everyone to the dance floor, and with an air of ceremony, she and her new husband cut the cake. The crowd cheered, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe this could still be salvaged, that maybe things could still be okay. But just as my sister was about to feed her new husband the first bite, I saw her hesitate. She looked at the kids, both of them still sitting at the table, whispering quietly to each other, and then she made a quick decision. Without even saying anything to me, she reached for the cake knife again, cutting a piece much smaller than I'd expected, then handed it to one of the bridesmaids. The message was clear: my kids wouldn't be participating in the traditional cake-cutting ceremony. They weren't even invited to stand by her side for this momentous event. I couldn't believe it. The sting of it cut deeper than anything else. It was a final, silent rejection. I stood up without thinking, Sophie and Alex following closely behind me. "Mom, where are we going?" Sophie asked, her voice shaky. "We're going home," I said quietly. "We're going home." But as we turned to leave, I caught sight of my sister standing at the head of the room, her eyes finally meeting mine. For the briefest second, I saw the regret flicker there, but it was too little, too late. The doors opened as we stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face, and I realized that we weren't just leaving the reception. We were leaving the remnants of what was once a close relationship behind. The reality of it hit me all at once. I wasn't just leaving the wedding. I was leaving my sister. And I wasn't sure we'd ever find our way back. The car ride home was quiet. Too quiet. Sophie and Alex, who were usually full of chatter after big events, were unusually subdued. I couldn't blame them. I felt the same. The whole night had been a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, hurt, and a strange sense of finality that I couldn't shake. I had gone in with the hope that things might be different, that my sister and I might find a way to repair the damage done. But instead, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. When we got home, I parked the car in the driveway, but I didn't immediately get out. I just sat there, staring ahead, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I didn't know what to feel anymore. "Mom?" Sophie's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to her in the back seat. "Yeah, sweetie? Are you mad?" she asked, her voice small. I could hear the concern in her tone, and I hated that I had put her in this position. "No, I'm not mad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just really sad, I guess." "I didn't want to mess up her wedding," Sophie said quietly, her eyes welling with tears. I reached back to comfort her, my heart breaking. "You didn't mess anything up, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong." But I wasn't so sure about that. It felt like everything about the night had been wrong. Sophie hadn't tripped on purpose, she wasn't trying to be disruptive. And yet, from the moment she stumbled in front of everyone, it felt as though everything spiraled out of control. I turned off the car, and we all went inside. The kids went straight to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, replaying every moment of the wedding in vivid detail. I kept wondering where things had gone so wrong. I kept asking myself if I had been too sensitive, too defensive. Maybe I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been disrespected, not just as a sister, but as a person. Eventually, I decided to call Marie. I had to. I needed to hear from her, to try to understand if there was still a chance for us to salvage anything from this night. She answered on the second ring, her voice sounding tired. "Hello? Marie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to talk to you." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I know, I'm sorry. I've been trying to process everything too." Her words felt hollow to me. It wasn't just the wedding, it was everything that led up to it, everything she had said about my kids, everything that had built up between us over the years. And now it felt like all that history had been wiped away with one phone call. "I don't know what to say, Marie," I said, my voice shaking. "What happened tonight? Why did you do that? Why did you treat us like that?" "I never wanted to hurt you," she said quickly. "I never wanted you to feel like you weren't welcome. I was just scared. And the wedding was so stressful, and I let things get out of hand. I shouldn't have made you feel like you were an afterthought." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "You did make me feel like that, Marie. You made me feel like I was a burden, like my kids were a problem. You didn't even give us a chance." "I know, and I'm sorry," she said again. "I didn't think about how it would affect you. I got so caught up in everything that I didn't stop to consider what was really important. And now I'm just so ashamed of how I treated you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was genuinely sorry, that she was remorseful for how things had turned out. But the damage had been done, and no amount of apologies could take away the hurt. I don't know if I can just forgive you, Marie, I said softly. You hurt my kids, you hurt me. And I don't know how we move forward from here. I understand, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But please, just know that I never meant to push you away. You're my sister and I love you. I want us to work this out. Her words were like a lifeline, but I wasn't sure I was ready to grab onto it. I was tired. Tired of the constant miscommunications, tired of the emotional distance between us. I wanted to believe things could get better, but part of me wondered if we had already reached a point of no return. I don't know, Marie. I really don't know, I whispered. Can we at least talk about this more when you're ready? She asked quietly. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose you either, I replied, my voice breaking. But I don't know if I can just forget what happened. I need time. I understand, she said, her voice full of regret. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. We hung up shortly after that, and I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that we could go back to the way things used to be. But the truth was, I didn't know if we could. And that terrified me. The days following the wedding were a blur. I spent a lot of time just existing, going through the motions for the sake of the kids. They were still too young to fully understand what had happened, but I could see the effects of that night weighing on them. Sophie, usually so full of life, was quieter than usual. She kept asking if we could go back to the wedding if Aunt Marie was upset with her. Alex, on the other hand, hadn't said much, but I could tell he was picking up on the tension in the house. I tried to act like everything was fine, but I wasn't fooling anyone, especially not myself. I didn't reach out to Marie immediately after our phone call. I needed space. I needed to figure out what I wanted, what we needed. I was angry not just at her, but at myself for allowing it to go on for as long as it had. The hurt from the wedding was still fresh, and no matter how many times I tried to talk myself into forgiving her, I just couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed too much. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to distract myself with work, with the kids, with everything I could think of. But my mind kept going back to that night, to my sister's coldness, to the way the wedding had spiraled into an event where we were nothing more than the embarrassing family members in the back row. Then, 2 weeks later, Marie called again. I almost didn't answer, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding her forever. So, I picked up the phone. Hey, her voice sounded softer than before. I know I hurt you and I don't want to keep pushing. But I was hoping we could talk. In person this time? I hesitated. Talking over the phone was one thing, but facing her in person? I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt a glimmer of hope. Okay, I said slowly. Let's meet. We agreed on a small coffee shop halfway between our houses. It was a neutral spot, somewhere we could have a conversation without the pressures of family or wedding expectations hanging over us. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table, her eyes scanning the menu, though I could tell she wasn't really looking at it. She looked up as I walked in, and for a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. It felt like years had passed, yet in some ways, it felt like only yesterday that we'd been close. I could see the tiredness in her eyes, the same weariness that had been in my own heart. But this time, there was something else too, regret. She stood up when she saw me, and we both hesitated before exchanging a tentative hug. It wasn't as warm as I remembered, but it was enough. I'm glad you came, she said, her voice small. Me too, I replied, taking a seat across from her. So, where do we go from here? She sighed, leaning back in her chair. I don't know. But I want to fix things, Laura. I really do. The wedding, everything that happened, it wasn't what I wanted. I pushed you away because I was scared, because I thought I had to make everything perfect, and I lost sight of what really mattered. You and your kids are my family. I've been so selfish, and I'm sorry. Her apology was the first real one I had heard from her. I could hear the pain in her voice, and I could feel my own walls starting to come down. I had been so focused on the hurt, on the way she had rejected us, that I hadn't stopped to consider her side, her fears, her insecurities. I don't know if I can just forget everything that happened, I said quietly. It hurt too much. But I also don't want to lose you, Marie. We've been through too much together. I don't want to lose you either, she said, her voice breaking. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can do better. I sat there for a long moment, considering her words. I wasn't ready to forgive her right then, but I knew that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, it was about choosing to move forward even when it seemed impossible. I think I need more time, I said carefully. But I'm willing to work on this. On us. If you're willing to meet me halfway. Marie nodded, her eyes shining with relief. I will. I promise. The rest of the conversation was spent hashing out everything that had happened, the wedding, our relationship, the things we had both been holding back. We talked about our childhood, our fears, and the things we'd never said to each other. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was one we both needed. By the time we left the coffee shop, it was clear that we hadn't solved everything. But something had shifted. The ice had been broken, and there was a possibility, however small, that we could rebuild. Slowly, carefully, but we could rebuild. As I walked to my car, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't sure what the future held for my relationship with Marie, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. And maybe that was enough for now.